So you guys did great on the rewind. However, we just did that lesson, so I would expect that you would do really well on the rewind. But in general, there's a lot of stuff to know with quadratics and quadratic formulas. So we're going to keep going with some more stuff that we need to know about quadratics. However, do not forget the domain and range. It's very simple if you remember it, but for some reason, people are always forgetting it. Okay, so we're going to move on, and we're going to talk about 4 more things that we need to know about quadratics and the graphs of parabolas. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the zeros of a quadratic function and how we find those from a graph. Then we're going to talk about the axis of symmetry from a graph. And then we're going to talk about how to find the axis of symmetry using an equation. And the last thing we're going to talk about kind of puts all of that together, because it's how to find the vertex of a parabola if we just give you an equation. So, all right. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the zeros of a quadratic function. What do you think the zeros are of a quadratic function? Not necessarily, because the vertex is more like, if we're using the word origin to mean where it starts, that's the vertex. But what do you think the zeros are?
Zeros means you could have more than one answer.
Okay, that's true. You can have more than one answer. My hint in this case, in this particular equation, is that there are 2 answers for the zeros. Braylon?
Is it where it meets the
Yeah, where it meets what axis? The x-axis. It's where it crosses the x-axis, so where that is 0 is right here, because that's where y would equal 0. So what are the 2 zeros of this function?
-1.
-1 and 2. Those are our 2 zeros. Because if I plug in those numbers, what would that give me? Well, what's 2 squared? -2 minus 2. What's 4 minus 2? 2 minus 2 is, so that would equal 0. And if I plug in -1, what's -1 squared?
1.
Minus -1?
0.
No. 2 minus 2. 0. So those are the 2 values that are going to give you 0 in your equation. But how do you find them on a graph?
When they cross the x.
Where it crosses the x-axis. So where it crosses the x-axis are your zeros. So in this case, our zeros were -1 and 2. All right. So we would say that the zeros of this function are -1 and 2 because that's where the y would be equal to 0. So where would the 0 of that function be for letter B? How many are there? How many are there? 1. How come there's only 1 here and there were 2? Yeah, it's right on the vertex, so it only is going to touch it 1 time. Where is that 0? 1. So 1 is our, 1, 0 is our 0. You can also just say x equals 1. Either of those is fine. All right. What about C?
0.
There are none. Okay? In this case, there are no zeros. There is nothing you can plug in for this that would give you 0 for y. All right? There's nothing you can plug in for x that would give you 0 for y. It does not ever touch the x-axis. So you have 3 options. You can either have no zeros, you can have 1 0, or you can have 2. How come you can't have 3?
Because they will go
Like that? Would that be a quadratic? No. All right, it can't bend that many times because it would have to curve a bunch of times to give us 3 zeros. So you cannot have that. That's when we start talking about cubic and quartic functions. And by we, I mean not me, because we're only doing quadratics in Algebra 1. Okay? So you can either have no zeros, as in letter C. You can have 1 0, as in letter B. Or you can have 2 zeros, as in our first example, because it crossed it twice. So you're looking for where it crosses the x-axis. And again, how come B only had 1? because it touched the x-axis and then it kept going down. Okay, so it's only going to have 1, 0. All right, how would you check it to make sure they're right? Plug it in and it should give you what? 0. Okay, I trust that you guys can read a graph, so I'm not going to make you plug it back in. But if you're ever unsure, plug it back in and check and see. Okay, so here are our options. Again, you can have 1, 0 or 2 zeros. Now, the axis of symmetry, what is symmetry?
Like in the middle.
It's right in the middle. It's like a mirror image, right? So most often, like if I asked you guys to think of the example in nature of perfect symmetry, what would you think of?
The sun.
The water.
Okay, an insect. Let me be more specific.
Oh, an ant.
Butterfly.
No, a butterfly. Why a butterfly?
That's like the little thing.
Good. Thank you for reading my mind. What is true about a butterfly's wings? When you fold it over, they would be... Yes, 1, the butterfly would die, so don't do that. But 2, also, the wings match each other perfectly because they are exactly symmetrical. So again, what? Probably if you like folded a butterfly in half. Yeah, but does it flap it like all the way? Well, I have to put this on YouTube. Come on. I don't know. Maybe it wouldn't die, but I have a feeling if you picked up a butterfly and manhandled it, it would not survive. So don't, but trust the fact that they are symmetrical. Okay, so 1 half is identical to the other. This is going down a road I don't want to go on. Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. People did like butterfly collecting? Yeah. Well, you know, people are into weird stuff. When they do butterfly collecting? No. Like when they pin them into the books? No. Or the like shadow boxes? Well, look, that person sounds strange, but whatever they're into, right? To each their own. All right, so an axis of symmetry is the line that goes right down the middle of a parabola. Because remember how we talked about yesterday? A parabola is a mirror image. So if you folded it over, it's identical on both sides. So the axis of symmetry goes straight up the middle. Okay, so to find that, it's always going to go through what point? It's always going to go through the, not necessarily the origin, the vertex. It has to go through the vertex of the parabola. Because again, the vertex is where it splits. So the axis of symmetry would go straight through the vertex. So in this case, our axis of symmetry is 3. So x equals 3 is our axis of symmetry. Because the line goes straight up and down. And when a line is vertical, the equation is x equals 3. Because at every spot on this line, no matter what the y is, what's the x? Always 3. Okay? So the axis of symmetry is x equals 3. Whereas down here, the axis of symmetry would be x equals -2, because that's where the vertex is. All right, so the vertex here is at -2, -4. So the axis of symmetry is at x equals -2. The other way you can tell is if you have 2 zeros of a function. If there's 2 zeros, the axis of symmetry should be directly in the middle. So if your zeros are 0 and -4, your axis of symmetry should be at -2, because it's right in the middle of those. Yep. So again, an axis of symmetry is just the line that cuts it straight through the middle. It will always go through the vertex. All right. So where would the axis of symmetry be in A? Positive or negative? +2. So the equation of this line would be what? X equals 2. Good. X equals 2. All right. Where is it here in B? 3? So this is 1. And this is what? 5. And so halfway between 1 and 5 is? Yeah, you were right. So it's x equals 3. Just because there's not a number on the coordinate plane doesn't mean there isn't a number there. All right? So x equals 3. And it's always going to be an x equals, because the axis of symmetry is always what kind of line? Straight. Which way? Up and down a vertical line. And a vertical line is always x equals. If it was a horizontal line, it would be left to right, and it would be y equals. But because it's a vertical line, it's x equals. Yep. Like what if it was a fraction?
Yeah.
Yeah, it can be. So for instance, what if it were like this right here and this right here? So if the axis of symmetry were -1 and 2, what's halfway between -1 and 2? Yeah, it's like 0.5. So the axis of symmetry would be x equals 0.5. Okay? How could you figure that out if you don't know off the top of your head that it's 0.5? What could you do with these two numbers? Add them and then divide by
Add them in and divide by
2, because you're looking for the halfway point. So if you add them and divide by 2. So 2 plus -1 is 1. 1 divided by 2 is 1/2. Okay? It will always be, I don't want to tell you always and then you find one that's not right. But for ones that I give you, if it's a fraction, it will always be 0.5. Because I'll give you whole number zeros. I'm not going to give you fractional zeros. Okay. What if you do not have a graph and you just have an equation? We have a formula for finding the axis of symmetry using our quadratic trinomial. All right? So the formula is x equals b over 2a, except it's negative. Okay? And again, this is like what we talked about, dividing by 2. So remember, in a quadratic formula, ax squared plus bx plus c. So these are the a and b's that we're talking about here. All right? So if my equation is this, y equals x squared plus 3x plus 4, what's b? 3. Just 3, it's just the coefficient. And what's a? 1. Okay, again, it's the coefficient, not the variable. So there's an invisible 1 in front of here. So then we plug that into the formula, x equals negative b over 2a. So negative 3 over 2 times 1. So what's 2 times 1? 2. So it's negative 3 over 2, which you can leave like that or write as negative 1.5. Okay, so the formula you use is negative b over 2a if you do not have a graph. If you have a graph, just find it wherever the middle is. All right, but this lets us find it even if we just have an equation. Brendan.
So that's how you find those.
Axis of symmetry. Yep, so that's x equals negative 1.5. Okay, go do these 4, but before you get up, for number 1 and 2, you're just finding the zeros. For numbers 4 and 5, you are finding the axis of symmetry. Remember, it should be an x equals equation, not just a number. Go. Okay, so for those of you that I said your answers for 4 and 5 were wrong, if you didn't have the x equals, I'm not trying to just be nitpicky. It's not me being nitpicky. An axis of symmetry is a whole what? It's a line. It's not just a point. So if you just say 0, that's not right because it's not just like the point 0. It's the entire line x equals 0. So it's that whole vertical line. All right, now, sometimes I'm not going to give you a graph and I'm just going to give you an equation. So we're going to talk about how now you could find the vertex of a parabola if I just give you the equation. This is a lot of writing. This is very convoluted. I'm going to write it in different steps. So if you can find a spot to write these down, I would, because I think I'm going to just simplify it a little bit. So the first thing, if you have an equation, all right, so to find a vertex from a quadratic equation, the first thing you want to do is find the axis of symmetry. And to do that, we use the formula x equals negative b over 2a. All right, so remember, we can use that formula to find the axis of symmetry. Then that axis of symmetry is what? Our x or y value? Is that our x or y value of our vertex? That's our x value. So what do you think I could do to find the y value of our vertex then? If I have the x and I need the y. If I have an x and I need a y, what should I do to find the y? Yeah, just plug it in. So the second step is plug in the x. Into your quadratic. And that'll give you the y. And then that's your vertex. The x, y, that is your vertex. So then you just write it as an ordered pair. Because you found the x, and then you plugged it in to find the y. Okay, so remember, the axis of symmetry is the line that goes through the vertex. So the x value is the value from the vertex. So then just to find the y, you just plug it in. So let's say, for example, we were doing y equals, give me a number less than 5, Braylon. 4. Cecilia, give me a number less than 10. And Angel O, give me a number less than 3. 1. Okay, so let's say this were our quadratic equation. All right, so if this is our quadratic, what's A, what's B, what's C?
4, 5, 9.
So 4 is A, so A equals 4. What's B? -5, and C equals 1. Good. Okay, so then the first thing I have to do is do what? Find the axis of symmetry. So I want to find the axis of symmetry by using x equals -b over 2a. So if I plug in -5 for b, what does it end up becoming? Positive, because what happens with two negatives? They make a positive. So 5 over, and then what's a? 4. So what's 2 times a? 8. Good. So x equals 5 over 8. All right, then what would I do with that to find the y value? Yeah, just plug it in. So I'm going to plug that into this equation. So y equals 4 times 5 over 8 squared minus 5 times 5 over 8 plus 1. How do I square a fraction? How do I do like 5/8 squared? Yeah, you could do that. But what does squaring something mean? Times itself. So I'm going to do 5/8 times 5/8. So then that would give me what? 25 over 64. And then I'm going to multiply that by what? Times 4. So 25 over 64 times 4 over, what do I write 4 over? Yeah, over 1. Okay. What happens with 64 and 4? Not by each other, because one's on top and one's on the bottom. If I have 4 quarters, how much money is that? $1. So it's like 100 cents. So 25 times 4 is 100. And then what's 64 times 1? 64. All right, so 100 divided by 64. So that's my fraction there. Minus, what's 5 times 5? 25 over 8 plus 1. And here, I would just put that in my calculator. Okay? I promise most of these will be whole numbers, not fractions. All right, so I would put that in my calculator to get y. And I end up getting y equals 0, negative 0.56. All right, so then my last step is just to write my x value and my y value. and there's my vertex. But again, most of them that I give you will be whole numbers, okay? So the process is exactly the same. You plug it into this formula to get your x, then you take your x and you plug it into your actual quadratic, and then that's your y. And then there's your ordered pair. Okay, that's all going to be posted. All right, so if you need that, that will all be posted. So how do I start this one? So x equals negative b over 2a, right? So then, Matthew, what'd you say for b? Why is it positive 10? Yeah, two negatives make a positive. Okay, and then what? 2 times 5. Just 5. Guys, remember, a, b, and c are just numbers, not the variable. What's 2 times 5? So 10 over 10 gives you what? Good. So our x is a whole number. So x equals 1. Then what do? So that's part 1. Plug it into what? My original equation for what? For 1 for x, right? How many times do I write that in here? Twice. So it becomes y equals 5, 1 squared minus 10, 1 plus 3. What's 1 squared? Times 5? What's 10 times 1? What's 5 minus 10? Positive or negative? Negative 5 plus 3? Negative 2. So then what's my answer? 1 comma negative 2. Perfect. All right, so you find your x using negative b over 2a. You plug it into the original equation to find your y, and then your answer is just that as an ordered pair. And this is the vertex, which means that's the point at which your parabola turns, either going up or going down. Yeah? What do you mean do with the exponent? Well, what's 1 squared? Yeah, but what's 1 squared? 1. Yeah. So that would just be 1 times 5. Can you put your arm down? Okay. Are you good? Okay. All right, go ahead and try these. So these are all written out for you in like break it down steps. So find A, find B. If you don't want to write them down like that, that's fine. Just do the 3 parts that you have to do. So plug it, like find the axis of symmetry, plug it in to find the vertex. Okay, go try them at your boards. Do at least 2 of them.